Well, greetings this day. Hope you're doing well and everything. And I'm excited about this lesson we're going to talk about. And the title of it is The Reading of the Will. And no, it's not my will, and hopefully not yours either, but it is in a way. We'll talk about that more in detail. So I'm going to refer to a story out of First Chronicles, the 28th chapter, verses 2 to 6, and the 29th chapter, the first 5 verses. Now, I won't read those to you because I'll let you look those up in a little bit in detail, but I will refer to them and kind of tell the story of them inside the lesson. I subscribe to a couple magazines, among many others I subscribe to, but they're both about archaeology. One is about archaeology in universal sense of what's discovered of civilizations across the world, but the other one is about biblical archaeology, which I thought was fascinating, as they would find out more about the Jewish faith group and about Christians, where they came from, and other faith groups whatsoever, but from a Bible perspective to enhance the Bible understanding. And I really enjoy these. What's always fascinating about that is that what as archaeologists you say, as I found this quote in one of the magazines, man is best described by what he leaves behind, or he or she leaves behind. What we leave behind is who we are in a lot of ways. And that can apply to our generations, that whatever generation you're in right now. That is what we are, our legacy, what we leave other people in that reputation, the values that we have. And I wonder, when I look at those and read those articles, and I kind of wonder, what will they what will they come to conclusion about in my generation that I live in? Or maybe you could apply this to yourself as well. What will they find in that sense? What kind of things that are, I mean, we're talking about what's obvious, what we believe in, but when you take, say, 5,000 years from now, all of a sudden everything's is dust, everything's buried where it may be, and other civilizations have come on top of us. So when they finally dig down into where our generation is, what will they find out about that? How they conjecture when they find possibly a hula hoop, for example, that is probably turned into rock or something, a fossil of a hula hoop, this big round thing. I'm sure they'll think about what is kind of, is this a new spacecraft piece or something like that? Not really sure what a hula hoop does. Or maybe the Rubik's Cube, they discover one of those pieces of that and saying this decorative thing must be a necklace, or oh, who knows what they'll say. Or maybe they'll find references and as they discover this language called English that we used, and there's this name Taylor Swift keeps coming up, and everyone said, I wonder who she was. It must have been a princess or maybe a queen or some hierarchical nobleman, where maybe they won't even know who she is. Uh, but will they decide that we were not so wise, maybe, in some ways, that describes maybe the trash on the highways and where they're littered along these lanes, that they say, wow, there are a lot of things that are like thrown away on the side of the roads here. Or maybe these disposable products, a lot of the styrofoams and things like that. And maybe even the letters and some stories about thrown away relationships. Is that what they're going to discover about us, of what our values are? I think we need to think about what we're going to leave behind, and not necessarily a, a reputation or whatever it may be, in the sense of values we have, valuables we have. Not that we have, cars and we have homes, we have things of this nature, maybe a bank account and some savings, whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. And so we all have some kind of legacy of some kind when we leave this world, whether we like it or not. Somebody's going to remember us, and somebody's going to think about us, and some guy's going to apply values to our life. A legacy can be an inheritance or a quality of a person when they die. Um, there's a wealthy man in a small town who died. One of my favorite stories. And he had 3 sons, okay? And all of them were very, very prosperous, and they all had gone their own lives. And so they came together at his bedside as he was dying, and he told him, he said, look, he said, I want to take some of my wealth that I've accumulated with me to heaven so I can have some great comfort there for eternity. So what I've done is I have I have given each of you $100,000. And so when I die and you're at my graveside, just before they close me out, I want you to throw that money in with me so when I'm going up, I'll grab that money and go up to heaven. Boy, you talk about theology. Anyway, so they all said, yes, Dad, we promise we'll do that. And so uh, they all gathered around there, and each son decided to do that, and the great side happened. The first son steps forward, says, well, I've only got $10,000 left of what he gave me. He says, I had to use it on an emergency basis because I have unexpected bills as a doctor, and I need to fund a new wing of my practice. And I really needed it. I knew that he would want me to do that. So, but I did save some money for him as he requested. So he threw the $10,000 into the grave. Well, the second son stepped forward and said, well, as a lawyer, I needed some money to buy a bigger apartment for my law practice because I had clients coming in, so I kind of used it as an office at the same time. And I think Dad would understand that. So I've got only 5,000 here, but I used it really wisely for my career, and he threw it into the grave. The third son, who was a banker, stepped up and looked at the other two brothers and said, I just can't believe how cheap you two are. I cannot believe how selfish you are that he would give you $100,000 and you would spend it, majority of it, on yourselves when he asked it for himself. That it was his money. He said, I'm going to tell you something. I'm not that kind of person. He said, I'm not that selfish. Well, here's my money, all of it. And he threw in a check for $100,000. Who's a smarter one of that? I think that's a funny joke. But anyway, that's the point. We all receive and leave legacies. They may be our skin color, our eye color, our height. Many of our physical characteristics come from our forefathers, our parents and grandparents, and we can see that going on. We also will leave that with some other people as well, possibly. We speak of our individual DNA, and we receive from our parents, and we pass it on to other children, whoever it may be. So a legacy could be both negative and it can be positive, or very a passive memorial to us. One example is provided by the history of these two families in colonial America. I did a little research from archaeology, and I discovered this story. It's fascinating. There's a guy by the name of Max Juke, or Juke, I can't how to pronounce it, who was a very crude backwoodsman, known for his very hard living and his weak moral characters. His legacy, now this is true story now, was marked by many children, some of them illegally, most to be ridiculed. I mean, it numbered 709 descendants that came from him. That included 280 paupers, 140 criminals, 60 thieves, 6 murderers, 128 prostitutes, and 300 of them dying early in life. That was from his legacy. Now, Jonathan Edwards, who was a very famous preacher way back in the day, left behind 1,394 family members, including 100 lawyers, 30 judges, 13 college presidents, 100 college professors, 62 physicians, and 60 authors from his legacy. Now let's go back to our scripture lesson now. Isn't that fascinating how coming from us, a lot of legacy could happen, both positive and negative. In Chronicles 28, King David began a great legacy, a long shadow of his life. We often see newspaper articles or interesting documentaries of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, for example, where people of Israel go to pray who are Orthodox Jews. And that's on the very west wall of the temple that David prepared for construction. He first bought its location, a threshing floor he purchased for his own worship service. That's how he started. When he envisioned building the temple while he was still king, he was told no by God. You cannot build that. He carried too much baggage in his life, specifically his days as a warrior and his moral failure in marriage with Bathsheba, as we know the story. So David was instructed by God to prepare the temple for his preparation. So he was never able to build it because of his legacy and how he got to where he was. Our lives are shaped by the legacy of others. Alfred Nobel, for example, invented dynamite that was used in a war to kill and injure people. In his later years, he established the Nobel Peace Prize Foundation to recognize and reward world peacemakers. Louis Pasteur invented immunization for rabies. He wanted to test it on himself until a young boy was bitten by a rabid dog. He saved the boy's life and was continued with the better part for all of us because we now have rabies shots. Sir Nicholson Winton, one of my heroes. You got to read about this guy. I've got pictures of him on my computer. Was a stockbroker in Czechoslovakia when Hitler marched through his country. Winton was there, and he was watching how his Jewish people were imprisoned and captured and even killed. So Sir Nicholson used his wealth to save 699 Jewish children using trains to ship them out of the country. And a recent study found that those 699 Jewish children had at least 7,000 offspring who has blessed Europe and the world by their existence, all because of one man and the legacy he left and something he did. Not who he was, but that the resources he had provided, and the compassion in his heart provided a legacy. There's a guy by the name of George McCluskey who raised his family. I read this somewhere in one of my articles in my files, with the practice of spending 1 hour each day to pray for his family. His two daughters married husbands who were cousins and very close. And from those marriages came one son each. Now, this is a guy named George McCluskey. One son who became a faithful pastor, and the other son became a psychologist. And that son was James Dobson, who founded Focus on the Family, who's right here in Colorado Springs as a world spiritual family nurture establishment. We are all preparing our legacy. Churches also build and leave legacies right there where you attend. The 7 churches in Revelations is recognized, maybe example of church legacies. Now, we all know that churches have a legacy of evangelism and missions, of stability, spiritual nurture, faithfulness, whatever it may be, but there are some who are known for their disagreements and their failures too. Of the 7 churches in Revelation, the book of Revelation, only one, the church of Smyrna, was described as, quote, rich, being faithful, and gaining the crown of life. Only one out of the churches that mentioned there of 7. There was a small European village. There was a wealthy nobleman who built this beautiful church for the people. And when it opened up, people admired the beautiful walls and windows, but asked about the absence of light inside of the church. There were only brackets on the wall, but each family was to bring their own lamp to help provide light for the whole church. And those lights lit up a place of worship. Our legacy lights the way for other people after us. As one philosopher said, life is like the course of a ship in the ocean. I like that. So when the ship plows forward, breaking through the surf, it crests waves, some small and some very large. And they appear to almost sink the ship, but the ship keeps going on. But if you look behind the ship, it leaves a wake, the evidence of its journey. The further the boat travels, the harder it is to see where the ship had been. In time, the wake just disappears into the ocean. It's the same way with the memory of our lives many times. People are going to forget us. People are going to say, yeah, I had a great-great-great-grandfather, or they're going to remember I had an aunt way back, or something like that. I don't remember her name. I don't remember his name, whoever it may be. And we'll be forgotten by name at times. But what we're trying to leave is a wake behind us. It may disappear from sight, but not from the impact in long terms with other people. And we got to make sure that wake is strong spiritually. Now just imagine if your ancestor had been more mindful about what they were passing on for future generations. Just imagine if your great-grandfather resisted the insatiable desire to drink alcohol and abuse his wife after the war. Imagine if your grandfather broke the cycle of abuse before he passed on to his only son. Imagine if your father had been able to conquer his demons before alcohol destroyed the parents' marriage. Just imagine if that would have happened. 3 generations and hundreds of lives later, the destruction and the despair is incalculable of this type of abusiveness and this type of legacy in a negative way leaving behind. Now, let me give you an example from my own personal life. My father was physically and sexually abused as a child. He ran away from home at the age of 16 and never looked back. But do you think that, and he had the choice, that he continued the legacy of how he was treated and give that to me and my sister? No. He made a pointed decision to not leave such a legacy, but one of love, respect, and a spiritual nurture. The one thing that he had always wanted and wished he had, he gave it to others from himself. Now, I'm not saying I didn't earn a few spankings along the way, but he only decided on that because I deserved it. In fact, I deserved more than I received, really, when it comes down to not being very disciplined in some ways, because he wanted to do the right thing. How different all those lives would have been if someone had just stopped the madness. See, we all leave a legacy in the traits we leave on future generations. Even if nobody remembers our name, it leaves an imprint, a thumbprint into their hearts, into their minds subconsciously. And we'll never know it, but the Lord does, of course. Traits are not chronicled in Ancestry.com. It goes way back of what the traits are, the legacy that we leave in people's hearts. See, it's up to us to recognize patterns. It's up to us, moreover, to break the patterns if they need to be broken. The patterns of darkness and brokenness and hate and immorality, the patterns of addiction and abuse. And ironically, these patterns of behavior are like your deepest connection to your people in your past. Does that sound familiar to you? Yes, your time on this earth is short. And your children and grandchildren and just your neighborhood children, the children that watch you in the church aisles there and in the hallway, the smile you give at the people and how you radiate the love of Jesus inside the grocery store. But your legacy can be long. They break those kind of patterns when they see someone like you, that's not the way life has to be lived, to encourage them to change the pattern. I read this somewhere. A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit. Isn't that neat? Rather than focus on leaving that priceless vinyl record collection, for example, to your children and grandchildren or to some friends, leave behind something much more valuable, something that will live on a long before, while you're gone. It will live on and on and on, and God will use it. Seek to promote the priceless pattern of health and prosperity, faith and goodness and righteousness and love to those around you, to those you have in contact with. Whether it be family members or it could be someone outside of that. After all, these are the kind of traits we want to be remembered for. Now, I'm going to tell you a story to end this out. That's really a neat story that comes to part of a legacy within a spiritual nature. It's a true story from the days when Scotland's Covenanters were so severely persecuted for their faith. Covenanters, now gatherings, were prohibited, and the soldiers of the King of England were constantly on guard to prevent them from coming together. Nevertheless, the people somehow met for worship and prayer, and especially to receive the sacrament of communion. One day, there was a girl in her early teens who was hurrying at nighttime and evening time to a secret communion service on this Sunday. And as she turned a corner on her way, she was confronted by a band of soldiers. They questioned her as to where she was going, and in a rush of words, the girl found her answer. She said, "My eldest brother has died, and they're going to read his will this afternoon, and he has done something for me and left something for me, and I want to hear them read his will." Well, to relieve your minds, let me report that she was allowed to go to her meeting. but only because the soldiers were not as knowledgeable of their theology as was the girl. In a sense, she could hardly have given a better summary of what the sacrament of communion is all about. She has summarized its eternal significance and effective promise for our daily lives. That young girl understood well that because of the special emphasis in her religious training, and she used it to summarize the Holy Communion. Her group believed, as their names imply, that they were engaged in a covenant, a promise, a relationship, agreement, or whatever it may be. The term is one of the most significant words in the Bible. The Jews were covenant people, a nation that had a contract with God. Now, Christians are those who have taken a new covenant or New Testament, which is an interpretation, as we are often said, with God. The whole idea with this contract with God is symbolized for us in the communion service. So in Matthew 26, when Jesus celebrated his service with his disciples, he said to them as he took the cup, "This is my blood, the blood of the covenant, shed for many for the forgiveness of sins." So when we come together to receive the communion, we are coming to remind ourselves of a covenant between ourselves and God. It's a covenant which Jesus made effective with his death. So the New Testament uses legal language to describe it in Hebrews chapter 9 and 15. Let me read these two verses to you. "And so he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the eternal inheritance he has promised, since he died to set them free from the violations committed under the first covenant. For where there is a will, the death of the one who made it must be proven." We'll get to that. "For a will takes effect only at death, since it carries no force while the one who made it is alive." And that's the kind of understanding the little Covendere girl had when she told the British soldier that her elder brother had died. She was going to hear the reading of his will. Christians are a people who have entered a covenant with God. Jesus Christ sealed that covenant with his death. When we receive the sacrament of communion, we're not only remembering what Christ did, but we're laying hold of making it our own. Communion is a reading of the will, a legacy. It's a portrayal of what he has done for us, and thus a reminder of the fullness of life which is ours in God. It seems to me that many of us have claimed our spiritual inheritance because we never heard about the will. We just leave it sitting there. I mean, one reads all the time in the newspapers about, if you just contact us, we have some money here. We have this inheritance for you that was left, but we cannot find you. It's out there. Billions of dollars are just sitting there waiting for someone to claim it. I suggest that such is the case with many believers, but I have good news. In the language of the Scottish Coventry girl, quote, "Your elder brother has done something for you, and he has left something for you." So what has he done for you? We declare it at each communion service in two major phrases. We take the bread and we say, "In his stead, this is my body, which is broken for you, instead for you." The sacrament of communion reminds us that Christ died in our place. The bread and the cup commemorates his death because of what he stood for. But what then has he left for you? What is bequeathed of his in his will as the communion declares it? Again, we hear that phrase, "This is my blood, the blood of the covenant, shed for many for the forgiveness of sins." Now, at first hearing, there's a kind of a letdown about that, is there not? You may feel like that young woman one time who heard the reading of a will of her great aunt, who slumped down in disappointment when she hears that, "And to my favorite great niece, Agatha, I bequeath the 2 pieces of pottery in the library." And so she kind of mutters to herself, "Those funny old things with the oriental markings on them, why didn't she leave me something worthwhile?" And the attorney explains that those low, funny old things are from the Ming Dynasty pottery, worth many thousands, if not $1 million. Just so we say, It wasn't my sin I was worried about. Why couldn't he leave me something like I really needed? Really, like what? Oh, a success in my work and my job, or success and solutions to my family problems. I got so many, or some just annoying and peace of mind in my life as I get older. Look again at that piece of pottery, that cup of forgiveness. The wealth of that cup is beyond all our imagination. Well, let me sum it all up for us here. We have been named in the reading of the will from Jesus. We inherit vast treasures beyond money, estates, mansions, or anything else. We become unbelievably rich from God's sacrifice and blessing. What about our legacy? What will we be remembered for that is best of who we are? Will we be remembered as a faithful follower of Jesus? Will we be a person of compassion or forgiveness and spiritual courage? We have inherited much from the reading of the will at the communion table. How do we pass on these riches? Ask God. Lord bless you today. See you soon again.